Hello and welcome to The World This Week. Coming up on today's show, a theatre in the Ukrainian city of Mariupol housing thousands brought to the ground this week in what the Foreign Office believes was a targeted civilian attack as missiles struck tower blocks in Kyiv. There is hope for peace negotiations and the stalling of the Russian advance. Refugees continue to flood across the border, with the UN estimating over 3 million have now left Ukraine. Mothers and their children are the lucky ones to escape, as these hellish scenes from hospitals in cities like Mariupol show that people are unable to cope. And the knock-on effects of the war. Boris Johnson on a mission to the Gulf to find alternatives to Russian oil, and a worsening situation in Yemen as millions of children are on the brink of starvation. That's all on the way, but first to some good news this week. Nazanin Zaharie-Ratcliffe, the British-Iranian woman detained in Iran nearly 6 years ago, arrived back home in the UK alongside fellow British-Iranian Anousheh Ashouri on Thursday. The two finally left Tehran on Wednesday after their release was secured following months of negotiations. Mrs. Zaharie-Ratcliffe, who is 43, had been detained in Iran since 2016, accused of plotting to overthrow Iran's government. Mr. Ashouri, aged 67, had been arrested in Iran in 2017, accused by their government of spying, and was sentenced to 10 years in prison. Both have consistently and vigorously denied the allegations. These were the emotional scenes after they arrived back at RAF Brize Norton in the early hours of Thursday morning. Nazanin embraced her daughter Gabriella, who rushed to hug her, with her husband Richard Ratcliffe, who has been tirelessly campaigning for her release, most recently with a hunger strike outside the Foreign Office that lasted 21 days.
But most importantly, I want to pay tribute to my constituent Richard Ratcliffe for his relentless campaigning, but I also think he's really set the bar high for all husbands across the world. Can I say to Nazanin, welcome home after 6 long years. And can I say to Gabriella, this time, Mummy really is coming home.
Well, the government has settled a debt of almost £400 million owed to Iran from the 1970s, with the funds ring-fenced solely for humanitarian purposes. Now, to Ukraine for a roundup of some of the main stories from the third week of Russia's invasion. A theatre thought to be sheltering up to 1,200 civilians in the port city of Mariupol was bombed by Russia on Wednesday, as Joe Biden called Vladimir Putin a war criminal for the first time since Russia's invasion. This satellite image of the theatre is before the strike, with the words "children" written in Russian outside. There were reports of survivors, as the basement may have survived the blast. The city has faced some of the heaviest bombardments and has some 300,000 there who are trapped with no electricity or water. Around 20,000 people fled in the middle of the week in what is believed to be the biggest evacuation so far, leaving in humanitarian convoys. Apartments in central Kyiv became a more focused target for Putin's missiles this week. Scenes like these were seen in the capital as blocks of flats were left in flames and devastated as the city imposed a 35-hour curfew on Tuesday night amid what Mayor Vitaly Klitschko described as difficult and dangerous moments for the heart of Ukraine.
That's what Russians' war against the civilians look like. Destroyed buildings, destroyed infrastructure. City bus just got hit by the rocket. Lives are getting lost. That's the war that Russia started. That's the city of Kyiv. And many cities in Ukraine were destroyed. Lives were taken. That's the truth. These images is the truth of Russian war against Ukraine, Putin's war against Ukraine. That's what it looks like.
Also on Wednesday, Russian forces killed 10 people standing in line for bread in the northern city of Cherniv by artillery positioned outside the city. Though it's also the week where Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said peace talks with Russia are beginning to sound more realistic. And on Thursday, the UK's Defence Secretary Ben Wallace said the UK will deploy the Sky Sabre missile system in Poland along with 100 troops as NATO moves to beef up the security of Poland's eastern flank. Well, in one hospital in Mariupol, it overflows with patients it was never meant to deal with in a situation that is beyond desperate. Around 2,500 civilians have been reported dead in the city alone at the time of recording. Most of the scenes in this footage we've chosen not to show due to the extremely graphic nature. Well, this hospital is one of the few remaining structures taking people injured from artillery shells. Besieged by Russian forces that have bombed other hospitals, it serves as an emergency centre, a maternity ward and a morgue filled with bodies of children and adults covered in makeshift shrouds. This doctor was filmed speaking, overlooking many covered up in the basement with nowhere to bury them.
Because all the other hospitals were bombed and no one could collect them, there's no emergency services, there's nobody, relatives. I don't know where we will put them, how we will bury them. In a mass grave? I have no idea. The District 17 hospital does not accept them. Emergencies do not take them. We're the only location that takes them in. There is no other place.
Help! It is a city, residential buildings. SOS, help Mariupol. Children, women are being killed. Hospitals are overcrowded. We're all here for what? I don't understand. Genocide?
Scenes from Mariupol there, while the US President Joe Biden announced the allocation of an additional $800 million worth of security assistance to Ukraine. The move came ahead of Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky's address to the US Congress this week. Zelensky repeated his plea for a no-fly zone over Ukraine and called for more sanctions on Russia. In his address to Congress, he cited Pearl Harbor and the September 11th terror attacks as he appealed to the US for more help for Ukraine's fight. He also said the US must sanction Russian legislators and block imports. And he showed a packed auditorium an emotional video of the destruction and devastation his country has suffered. On Tuesday, despite worries within the European Union about the security risks of travelling within a war zone, the Prime Ministers of Poland, the Czech Republic and Slovenia arrived by train to Kyiv and met with President Zelensky. The Polish Prime Minister expressed solidarity and support.
We will never leave you alone. We will be with you, because we know that you are fighting not only for your homes, for your freedom, for your security, but also for ours.
Well, it's the first visit of high-level international guests to Kyiv since war broke out on the 24th of February. Well, before the break, a moment of defiance from within Russia that has inspired many.
Российский премьер подчеркнул, надо усилить сотрудничество в рамках союзного государства, а на совещании...
Marina Ovzyannikova, an editor at the state-controlled Channel 1, was detained after she ran onto the set on Monday holding a sign in protest against the invasion. Images were quickly shared across the world after appearing behind the anchor on one of Russia's most watched news programmes, holding a sign reading, "No war, stop the war. Don't believe the propaganda. They are lying to you here." Well, after she said she had been questioned for 14 hours and had not slept for 2 days and was not given access to legal help. She was fined 30,000 ruble, around £214, for a video message recorded before the act where she called on Russians to protest the war, saying, "Don't be afraid of anything. They can't imprison us all." Well, she had pleaded not guilty to the charge of organising an unauthorised public event, and it's not clear whether she will face separate charges. She said she has no plans to flee, but fears for her safety. Marina's protest has resulted in a quiet but steady stream of resignations from Russia's tightly controlled state TV. The World This Week continues after the break. We'll hear from mothers who've made their way to Poland on their terrifying experiences fleeing the capital as the number of refugees from Ukraine topped 3 million this week. Welcome back. You're watching The World This Week from the London Live news team with James Dickman. A review of the main international stories that have broken over the last 7 days. Still to come before 7:30. A new robot that can transport you to an entirely different place, quite literally feel like you were there. We'll show you the Italian Institute of Technology's new avatar system. But first, refugees have continued to arrive at the platforms of European nations around the continent en masse this week. In Poland, on Ukraine's border, they are seeing the majority before many move on through to other nations. Most are women and mothers with their children and have been speaking about their journeys.
Будь-який звук, там поїзд тормозив чи будь-яка там інше такі повищені.
Every noise, the sound when the train breaks or any louder noise, children just tremble every time. They're not old enough, they're 10, 11 and 12 years old, and they will have consequences in the future. We were in the basement during explosions and they read news information and they're worried also and scared. The war is always scary for adults, let alone for small children.
Переживають і дуже бояться. Ну, війна – це завжди страшно. Для дорослого страшно, а для дітей тим більше.
Важко. Дитина з інвалідністю, я в положенні. Чоловік лишився обороняти.
It is hard. I am with disabled child and pregnant. My husband is in Kyiv to defend our country. We hope that we will return back home. It's hard, but volunteers are helping everywhere, carrying stuff, helping with children. Glory to Ukraine, glory to those who help us here. I want to thank them.
З дитиною, тобто слава Україні, слава тим, хто тут нас приймає зараз. Дуже велике дякуємо.
We don't know when they're coming, but we know they're coming. We cannot house everyone along the border. So the idea here is to get as many people out further with trains and buses to Warsaw, Krakow, to Germany, other places in Europe as soon as possible. Notice that here on the train station, the last couple of days, there's just too many people coming during the night, and all the beds in town and outside in the reception points are getting filled up.
Well, the UK government has come under continued fire this past few weeks on their response with regards to letting in Ukrainian refugees. Earlier in the week, the government launched its Homes for Ukraine site for those wanting to host a refugee, with 100,000 signing up within the first day. The scheme offers families housing refugees £350 a week, tax-free. Housing and Community Secretary Michael Gove said there would be no limit to how many Ukrainians could enter the UK under the visa sponsorship scheme. though frustration could still be felt by people on the borders. British national Callum Clark and his Ukrainian wife Vitalania, whose family has fled Ukraine, spoke outside the Home Office visa centre in Poland about what Callum sees as the bureaucratic challenges refugees face getting into the UK.
Thankfully for us, our family, we've managed to be able to get in, jump ahead of the queue, if you will, just because of special dispensation direct from the Home Office, which you can't do for the tens of thousands who are going to need to come. I was checking the news this morning, there's 45,000, you might know better than me now, 45,000 UK families have already said they will take Ukrainian refugees, but every single one of them, as it stands, will need to come to a centre like this to do their biometrics, because Ukrainian people do not have international passports. The scheme announced by Priti Patel does not work because it only works for those with international passports who are the rich, who've already managed to do these kind of things. You know, we're obviously relatively rich because we're living in the UK, but we've had to, extensively use our resources to help out these people. Bear a thought for the people who are still in the refugee centres. They've got no way even to get to this, let alone try and book an appointment, and that's before you even consider building a case and etc. It's just an impossibility at the minute that the UK government has put in front of the Ukrainian people. I don't believe that the people in government are that cold-hearted that they would leave people out in the freezing cold like they're doing now. But that is what we are seeing. We've been to the refugee centres, we've seen the kids sleeping under tables who are not being helped by the UK government. There are plenty of other governments in the European Union who are stepping up to the plate and who are helping out.
Well, continuing with the government, the Prime Minister has defended his trip to the Gulf region to try and build closer ties with Saudi Arabia. The PM was welcomed by Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, to try and strike deals with leaders in the region to wean the West off Russian fossil fuels and find ways to cope with the energy crisis as UK families face unprecedented increase to their bills, set to intensify as the situation in Ukraine continues.
The reason for coming here is that it's not just that they've got oil, they're also some of the biggest investors here in the Gulf in UK renewables, in our wind farms, and that's what we'll be talking about.
Well, Labour accused the government of going cap in hand from one dictator to another by asking Saudi Arabia to produce more oil. It comes in the wake of the Saudi Kingdom's decision to execute 81 men in its largest mass execution in years last weekend.
The government have had 12 years to end their reliance on foreign oil and invest in homegrown energy to secure our supplies. Their failure has left us all vulnerable, reliant on another murderous dictator to keep the lights on and pumps open.
Well, more on its knock-on effects now, as the war in Ukraine is said to have a severe impact on the humanitarian assistance being able to be provided to children in Yemen, a UN official has said. A United Nations appeal for Yemen on Wednesday is aiming to raise $4.27 billion to alleviate what it describes as the world's worst humanitarian crisis.
Indeed, the horrendous situation in Ukraine will have an indirect and direct impact on our ability to assist children in Yemen, as the price of wheat or the price of fuel, as we have seen in the market, is very quickly increasing.
Yemen depends almost entirely on food imports, with 30% of its wheat imports coming from Ukraine.
In Yemen, the report shows that 2.2 million children under the age of 5 will suffer or are already suffering of acute malnutrition, including 500,000 of them suffering of severe acute malnutrition, which is a life-threatening condition which needs to be addressed immediately.
Scenes from Yemen there. Finally, something to take your mind off the ongoing crisis and its effects worldwide, and quite literally transport you somewhere else. In Italy, a new robotic project from the Italian Institute of Technology is bringing remote to a whole new level. iCub3 is an avatar system that is able to transport humans to a remote location in real time. The aim, however, is to offer an avatar usable by all and capable of replacing a human body in the real world.
Whenever I touch something, I feel a vibration on each finger. This is because the robot has some artificial skin mounted on each fingertip. In this way, whenever the robot touches something, I can feel it, like a vibration on my fingers. In addition, when I start lifting something, the haptic units that I have on my arms start vibrating as well, telling me that the robot is lifting some weight. So I know that the robot is firmly holding something and at the same time is holding its weight. So I know that something is in my hands and in my arms.
iCub 3 could simply incarnate the next level of remote working if there is a need to be physically on the job, but also perhaps gives the opportunity to those who cannot move to take part actively and physically in society.
Welcome to Venice.
Well, the operator here was able to experience the art on show at the Venice Biennale without actually being there.
Wow.
There you go. That's all from the world this week with James Dickman. We'll see you at 7 next Saturday as we round up the biggest international stories for a global city. Have a lovely morning.